Okay, great. So it's my pleasure to introduce Venkat Ranganathan, the speaker today. Venkat, it turns out that this is about 31 years now. And I had the pleasure of having him in my class as a student when he was an undergraduate at IIT Delhi. And one of the biggest joys of being a professor is to have your students do better than you. And Venkat has certainly done that. He's smarter, uh, better sighted, more awards, and he has more hair. It's actually he looked like this as an undergrad and he hasn't changed. So he's also discovered the secret to eternal youth. I think there's nothing more you can say other than you've seen his bio, CV, whatever. It's fantastic. And today I'm delighted to say he's also taken on the role of managing director at Microsoft Research in Bangalore, and which is really commendable. So like always a pleasure to meet with you. We're going to talk this about hybrid meetings. You've seen how difficult it is to get it set up. So we're listening to make it how to make it easier for all of us going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Keshav. Thanks for the generous introduction. I mean, don't believe anything Keshav said except the last part. Here is true. I think Keshav has done amazing stuff and he's done things that most people. I also had the pleasure of hosting him 2 weeks ago.
That's right.
Like a return visit, I guess. So yeah, I'm going to talk about, again, it's good to see old friends like John, others. I'm going to talk about this project called HyWay that really was born out of the pandemic, and it's something that really was going to be like a very short-term kind of thing, and then it's become a real project. It's an interesting thing. And then at the end, I will talk a bit about Microsoft Research India and how we are set up and tell you a bit about the lab, right? So I do want to keep a few minutes for that as well at the end. So HyWay, it is, if you're wondering about the name, it's a short for hybrid hallway. So the motivation, before I get to motivation, a bunch of people involved, many of them in India lab, but over the months and years, we've had collaborators in other Microsoft locations, Redmond, folks here in Cambridge, Alex Blanton is right here, and they've put in some people and some from as well. Actually, a bunch of people really contributed. So the motivation for this is captured well by this snippet from an article a few years ago, which is really, when people were saying, okay, pandemic, everyone went remote, but then as the world started reopening and people started coming back, and hybrid work took hold, there was a concern that people who chose to work remotely would, get left out of organic interaction. Right. The things like meetings, like this lecture and so on, I think work quite well remotely as well. If you know what's happening at this time, you're interested, you can join in, you can even ask questions and so on. But running into people in the hallway or having this water cooler conversation, those things don't happen. And although I picked this as motivation, the motivation for me was really the second month of the pandemic, where all of us were obviously isolated, and things like Teams and Zoom similar. Are great at what they do, but they provide a very isolating experience, right? They don't, you could be in a meeting with someone, you know what's happening in that meeting, you don't know what else is happening, right? So we started this with that motivation, but then I saw this article and I felt that it's captured things well, right? Now, what is this? That's correct, square one board.
Yeah, don't worry about silence.
Yeah, okay. So now, the kind of settings that we take for granted in the all physical world, some of them are captured here. I already talked about the water cooler. So I'm trying to sort of classify these as unstructured or semi-structured, right? So when I say structured, I mean something like this: a scheduled meeting where there's a time, a set of invitees, and people show up. Unstructured is not scheduled. It is something that happens organically. And then there's also, and then semi-structured is something like a trade show or a poster session or a conference where there is content laid out in a large space, but as a visitor, you can decide your trajectory. You can decide where to go, how to spend time, and so on. Right? So there is some structure, but it is not rigid. And then the other distinction I'm trying to make is that there are things that are called events, which are in a broad sense schedule. You know that the poster session is happening 10 to 11 on a certain day, right? And so if you want to engage, that's when you go. Whereas there are things like the water cooler and even the water cooler in particular, where the interaction could happen anytime, right? It could happen at 9 a.m. in the morning, it could happen at 6 p.m. in the evening, depending on when people happen to be there, right? So, as we think about this work, we want to really cover this spectrum, but as you will see, we've had greater success in some of these than others in terms of actual deployment and learning and so on, but we are still shooting for covering this space of semi-structured and unstructured and events which are at specific times and things that are more unconstrained in terms of time and so on. Now, obviously, this is a space that has a lot of work, and remote interaction is something that people have been doing for decades. I guess, Keshav, you were also at Berkeley, and I know that some of the early versions of remote video conferencing were done there. I think, John, you did some things at UCL, I think, right? Was it the
No, it's 86.
86, yeah. So I think this goes back 30, 40 years, right? So there is a lot of work here. I really think of sort of Teams and Zoom as sort of the progeny of kind of early work, right? These are really tools that really have brought to life what those research councils from the 80s and 90s did. But as I already mentioned, I think they're great at what they do, but they provide this isolating experience. Now, if you want to sort of provide unstructured interaction, I think the pandemic was a great time for people to produce tools, right? There was Gather and Spatial IOS, half a dozen of them, where they provided unstructured interactions in an all virtual setting, where everyone was remote, and then you have an avatar and you drive around and so on, right? What we are interested in is hybrid. When I say hybrid, what I mean is there is a physical reality. It could be the previous picture, it could be the trade show floor, where, which is where activity is happening. And some people happen to be remote, right? And you want to sort of weave them into that fabric, right? So hybrid is sort of key to what we're trying to do. And then again, there's been work, telepresence robots, obviously one line of work that's quite interesting. But it is expensive and hard to scale, right, for obvious reasons. There is also work sort of with sort of AR and VR headsets and so on. Again, that imposes on the user, right? So when we started this project, we really wanted to keep it as simple as possible, right? So that, and you will see some of the benefits of that, we could actually deploy at scale and actually get real people to use it and get feedback, right? So we just, again, I'm not saying that's the only part of the design space that makes sense, but we decided that we would prioritize those things, and therefore simplicity became a cornerstone of what we did. So in a nutshell, HyWay is really about enabling mingling. So this thing about unstructured, semi-structured, and sort of using the word mingling to represent that in a hybrid setting where there are physical or in-person users and remote or virtual users. So let's take a closer look at what might happen in one of these things, right? Again, think of a hallway, but it could be any other setting. Bunch of people having conversations on different things. Now, the important thing is that, while these people are talking about Microsoft, they know who else is around. With the corner of their eye, they can see that there are other people around. They can maybe even overhear a bit of what's being talked about. And if someone gets interested in a different person in a different conversation, or they overhear something that seems of their interest, they have both the awareness and the agency to act on that, right? They can actually move over and have that, join the new conversation. And so, right? So basically, awareness and agency are really, I think, the defining characteristics of the in-person experience, right? You don't have a Zoom or Teams like experience where it is a sanitized silo. It is, you're here, you might be in this lecture, but you also know who else is around, and there's awareness, right? And the ability to act on them. So you could imagine creating something like this with something like Teams or Zoom by saying that you set up screens, which is what we do in our thing also, right? That you set up in the hallway, you set up displays that can allow remote people to join. Have a Teams call or a Zoom call for each one of those, and then have that be the medium through which the in-person people and the remote people interact. But what we really have is then a bunch of silos, right? It is not really solving the problem we set out to solve. Instead, we want to create these sort of porous bubbles that allow people to have this awareness and so on. So now, in concrete terms, what we created is a system that as I said, is anchored in a physical space. In the physical space, we just deploy commodity hardware, just large displays, they have to be large, you don't have the money. And AV, audio speakers, microphones and so on, and camera. And we provide a map-like interface that is available to both the remote users, and if you have a set screen here, even the in-person users can see the same map, right? And on the map, we just represent users with the space bubbles. The green bubbles correspond to people who are remote. The ones with the red halo correspond to people who are present on the phone, right? One important thing I want to say is that we are not trying to recognize anyone. We are just detecting a face. We are locating it and putting it on the map, saying, okay, this face is there. It's like when I run into you in the hallway, I don't know who you are, but I know that you're there and I can see you. And if I see you again, I can say it's the same person I can talk to, right? So it is exactly trying to recreate that. We are not trying to recognize or do any of those things, right? Now, I think one important thing is that, and this is a lesson that we learned, is because we are hybrid, right, and we are anchored in a physical space, we are able to leverage the critical mass that shows up in person for free. And what I mean by that is, if you think about all virtual solutions like Gather, right, unless it's a network effect, right, unless enough other people join online, it is not worth your while joining, right, because then you won't have enough people to interact. Here, the assumption, and I think it's actually reality, is that people like to be physically there if they can, right? And they like to go to conference, they like to be at a trade show. So there is already a critical mass of people who have voted with their feet and shown up there. Right? Those are the red bubbles given this time. So as a remote person, as a green bubble, even if I'm the only remote person who joined, it's still worth my while because there's a lot of people there already in the system, right? So we get this, we are able to leverage existing user habits, which is people voting with their feet and showing up, to create a critical mass, and then we are able to sort of ride on that. And that's actually been quite critical to the kind of success we've had. Now, in terms of creating awareness, I've talked about this a few times, so let me explain what I mean. How we incorporate it in our design. One is conversations are focused. So when I'm part of a conversation, I can still hear sort of other people talking, sort of obviously not as loudly, but sort of muffled based on distance and so on. Exactly as I would in a physical setting, right? So I can overhear. We also have this notion of reciprocity, right? So in a physical setting, I can see John because John can see me, right? I cannot hide myself and be seen. And I think that is very critical to people being comfortable talking, even to sensitive things, right? Like, it could be in a crowded hallway, but we could be talking very sensitive things because we know that, someone else, with respect to whom this conversation might be sensitive, is not around. We don't see that, right? And if they show up, we see them approaching, we can see that, we can change subjects, right? So that awareness that comes is important. And so reciprocity, this is something that maybe by design, these online tools, Teams and Zoom, don't really do, right? You can turn off the video and still be part of the conversation, right? And you can, so we, and this becomes important when I talk about a different use case a bit, but essentially we sort of take this very, very seriously. I already talked about map as a means of awareness. The map is also the means for agency, right? So the map interface is what allows you to then walk around. And the last bit is what is going to enable us to deploy this at scale, which is, when you talk about a hybrid system like this, I think it is quite important, and I'll explain why in a couple of slides, to have a correspondence between the physical reality and the virtual view of that reality, right? Because that's when you can have interesting interactions that straddle the physical virtual boundary, right? Now, establishing that correspondence and maintaining that correspondence over time and doing it automatically is an interesting research challenge, right? And I'll talk about a bit of what we've done, and because there's a lot more to be done, right? So that in a nutshell is the design. So now let me actually motivate this last bullet, which is this correspondence thing, with this example, right? Going back to the old example, now it's no longer all physical. There are some virtual people on screens and they are talking, and this person moved to a different conversation. In a system like ours, what can happen is a remote person like this person here can see where this person went and follow them and continue the conversation. Exactly as would happen in a physical setting. And the reverse can happen too. The virtual person could have moved somewhere, and the person who's physically there will then know where to walk to, which other screen to walk to continue the conversation. And that's where the correspondence becomes important, right? Because I see a virtual person move somewhere, as a physical person, my modality of my agency really comes from walking. I need to know where to go to. Right? So I need to have the same view of the space that sort of corresponds to the other. So we've deployed this in many different settings. The biggest success we've had so far is in what I call as hybrid events. Think of it as the trade show or really poster events, because we're not doing trade shows yet. But things where there is it's a scheduled event, and there's some degree of structure, and then sort of we have so let me give you a sense of what the experience is like. This is where I hope the audio works. So this is a little video snippet of a remote user who's participating in the event and walking around, right? And as they walk, you will see that they get a sense of the buzz of the flow, and they get a sense of sort of things, audio fading in and fading out and so on, right? Audio is not working.
Yeah, that's a problem with HyWay. Let's see. Is your speaker set to local speaker? I'm sorry.
Okay, then yeah, could you just narrate it?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, tell us what's going on. Otherwise,
Got it. Okay, but I think we can move on now. Okay, fine. You know, and by the way, all these videos are online on our project website. So if you're interested, you can learn. But you know, there are some other videos. Actually, sorry, Keshav, it will be good because I do have multiple audio clips. Okay, just this one. It would be good to get this working if we can, at least for the local room.
Yeah.
I guess there's a way to do it. Let's get it.
Go to the Zoom call.
Zoom call at the bottom, right?
Yeah. Okay. Let's share the speaker, the wrong speaker. There we go.
Oh, that might work.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, thank you. Let's take it now.
Just volume. Yeah.
Okay, fine. I think we have to. Same as system. Should I say same as system? Or that's Yeti. What is Yeti?
You know, it's just a microphone, so you just want to keep the speakers to be your speakers.
Is this not working?
Hmm.
Okay, fine. I guess we'll have to do without that. Okay. Yeah, anyway, so I guess just take my word for it. You hear the buzz of the videos. It feels a bit like what would be if you were physically there, right? In terms of, and if you go to our webpage, we have from the same event a clip of person physically there walking around and a person remotely doing this. And, you know, there is a fair degree of similarity.
is that because the screens are sufficiently dense that you're picking up the audio over the entire
Yeah,
conference?
the screens are, I would say, like maybe 15 feet apart.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so you can overhear. I mean, if you were physically there, you would overhear what's happening in the other place, and so we are recreating exactly that. Yeah, you're right. So if things were very far apart, where you're not supposed to be able to hear the other thing, yes, it will be still a sanitized sort of silent experience. But yes, yeah. So I guess none of this is going to work now. But anyway, I will. Let me go ahead anyway. So this thing I talked about, mingling between physical and virtual, actually happened in an event, and this is not orchestrated. This is an event we were doing. There's this person at the bottom right, Professor Sunita. I don't know, you know, she was at Berkeley research, which I don't know, maybe didn't overlap with you. She was remote. She and I know each other, so she saw me on the map, recognized me. Again, the system doesn't recognize me, but she saw my face logo. She said, "Oh, that's how I wanted to chat." She just walked up and have a chat, right? So, and this is walking up and then coming. So again, it's very simple stuff, but this is what we take for granted in the all physical world, and we are able to do this in this hybrid setting. Now, again, yeah, this is where I would really like to, but anyway, maybe you can watch the audio. The video is online. We put a lot of effort in this creating this correspondence and also creating a map that reflected the look and feel of our setting. And this comment from a visitor to our lab about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, really underscores why that is important. And again, you're not hearing because when I play it, but let me tell you what he was saying. A professor from Oregon State. And this video is online if you're interested. What he was saying was he had come to our lab, not come to our lab, he had participated in an event in our lab remotely the year before. And we had a very early version of HyWay in early 2022, right, that he used with all its warts and limitations to participate in our event. And a year later, he came in person. And his comment, and this is like completely off the cuff, is he came for the first time, in fact, to India, to our lab, and he said it felt like he had already been there, right? Because he had walked around that map, and the map looked like our flow pretty well, and that correspondingly, he felt like he knew exactly where he could find the coffee. In fact, that's exactly his remark. I knew where he could find the coffee, so because he knew where the kitchenette was, and that familiarity that comes from having a high fidelity map, I think, and he said compared to things like the virtual tools like Gather, they're good for what they do. You don't get that sense, right? You don't get a sense that you've visited the place and you've actually been there. And he's not the only person who said this. He's the only person who said this that we got on camera. There are other people who have remarked very similar things, right? So again, it's a very simple point, but I think it does point out that simple things can make a big difference. We have done other things, around sort of mixing that. So one of the interesting things you can do is once you start doing an event on something like HyWay, you can do analytics quite easily, right? Now, here's the thing, right? Tracking physical people and knowing sort of that it's the same person and so on, you can do it, but it's more complex because of occlusion and all these problems. And it can raise concerns that, hey, the camera's looking at me and tracking me and so on, right? What we can take advantage of is that we have a hybrid event. We have physical people in person, and people who are remote. But they are part of the same event. You can measure the remote people much more easily, right? It's just now without being driven around. You can use the analytics you get from them to make recommendations to everyone, including the in-person people, right? Because if you assume that, like for example, maybe the heat map, right? We do a heat map. If you assume that LLM and business application, this is from an actual event, and this is clear the titles because so it's not talk, but this was the hotspot. This is where a lot of people are going to spend a lot of time. You can learn this from remote people, because it's easy to track them. And you can make that information available to an in-person audiences, right? So if I walk into this hall, I see a map saying, hey, that's the hotspot, and we can sort of choose to go there, right? So it's again a little thing, but the hybrid setting is providing the advantage that you can measure easily in one half and use that to help. Now, in terms of, we've done multiple events, internal events, many of them actually in Redmond. The Cambridge folks here did use it for some of the events as well. And the overall feedback is quite encouraging. And this year is a bit old, but I would say well over half rated it sort of either 4 or 5 on a scale of 5. People found the map to be useful. They thought this porosity, being able to over here. I mean, I think generally things were quite positive. The benefits of porosity is sort of things like adds to informality and enables unplanned interactions and all that. So all this is good, right? Now, the more detailed feedback was also generally quite encouraging, both from the attendees who really thought that people have been used to using Zoom and Teams during the pandemic, right? And as they started using this, they felt they could see the difference. But more importantly, from the event organizers, right? So for us to do like a poster session or a trade show, we really need to get these people on board. And what was happening is that we've had repeat customers. So we have this large internal sort of internal conference in machine learning and data science. And they've used our system 3 times in a row, and now they're talking about using it 4 times, right? So that's for us a strong signal that, okay, they're seeing enough value that are coming back to us. In fact, one of them even said that they have tried holding the poster session over Teams previously before our system existed, and they were just cancelled it were it not for this, because Teams is good for what it does, but it was not a fit for this. Of course, there were complaints as well, but those were mostly, I would say, technical issues. The audio didn't work. or, we still, I don't think have test tracking fully on a Mac and so on, right? So if someone's on a Mac and they can't join, they obviously feel excluded, but these are things that obviously need to be fixed, but what was happening is that no one's really complained or no one has really said anything saying, hey, this model is broken, I don't like this, right? So that has been encouraging, but of course, people could have other views, but we have seen positive feedback. We also, I was brave enough to try it on our CEO. He visited a year ago. We are based in Bangalore. He came to Hyderabad and gave us 45 minutes, right? And so the sensible thing to have done would have been to set up a Teams call so that he could have talked to the team back in Bangalore and had the interaction. But I guess that was too tame and timid for me. So I said, okay, let's try having him tonight. 45 minutes over receiver time, we did it. And yeah, I do have a video clip which is internal, but anyway, audio is not working, doesn't matter. But there was an employee town hall later that day, and he picked up this project and said he loved the experience, right? It is so in this case, it was not really an event. This is really, think of a remote executive visit, right? So you're an exec sitting in headquarters. You have to meet your remote team. But fly out there, that's expensive. You can have a bunch of Zoom or Teams calls. That's okay, but that doesn't give you a sense for that remote office and what it looks like and so on. Or you can set up something like HyWay and walk around, which is exactly what Sanjay did, and get a sense for not just get to meet the people, but also get a sense for what that space is like and who's sitting where and so on, right? And so we are quite excited about that. We also, I'm sure to other people, Bill Gates, I guess a bunch of people have come and seen it and had interesting things to say. Like a third use case that we are really want to push. So things like events and so on are very confined in space and time, right? They happen once in a while. So that's not a daily use case. Daily use case for us is what we call as hybrid workspace, right? So think of typical company and maybe at least a student office here. I'm sure faculty have better voice cabins, but we have our students sitting here. Some people are remote. You want to enable the same experience people would have of sort of shared awareness and so on if they were all physically there, right? So little things like, in this case, a bunch of people are chatting, and there are some people online on the screen and some people physically. And then let's say an online person starts walking over. When I say walking over, they start navigating the avatar to this woman's desk. A physical person can see that, and he can also walk over to John. Right? So he's physically walking over. This guy walked over virtually from there to here, and now they're having a desk level chat, right? Exactly as would happen in the physical one. So these are the kind of things we're trying to enable. And now to make this happen, the thing I talked about, reciprocity, becomes extremely important, right? Because we have done some pilots of this, and the feedback we got was, oh, I don't like this idea of having this camera screen, looking at it, right? So the kind of assurance we are trying to provide is that unless the remote person is seen on the screen and seen in sufficient size, they will not be able to see or hear anything. Right? So you cannot have a situation where either by design or some software failure, this person is not seen here, but they can still be listened. Because that's what scares me. The idea that someone out there hidden from view is sorry. So we are trying to provide a technical guarantee that can't happen. By essentially checking whether the image is seen here and it matches what's coming out of the other cameras. Right? So again, simple stuff, but I think this can go a long way in making people cover. So let me now switch gears and talk about some of the research problems we've been looking at in this space. So I talked about awareness, agency, and auto configuration. And so, what ties all of this together is what I would call as automated virtualization. So you have a physical space, you have virtual users as well. You want to make sure that things are corresponding and do this automatically. So we do have, I talked about guaranteeing reciprocity as 2 moments ago, so that's one example. What I'll do in the rest of the talk is just talk about 2 of these problems. The first one is on virtualizing physical users, and the second one is on so maybe I'm going to talk about the bottom one first. So the problem here is that you have a physical setting, and as I said, we have a map, right? So let's say you get this canvas, and there is ongoing work we're doing on taking existing CAD drawings like DWG files and so on. And using the power of multimodal LLMs to see if we can help someone create a textured, what should I say, realistic looking map like this with minimal effort, right? So can we automatically detect all the objects and then allow natural language prompts to say, hey, okay, make the floor a little darker or make it a little more brown over, and then sort of automatically within a few short steps, hopefully we'll understand. We're not there yet, but that's something we're working on. But then one of the problems is we're going to set up these screens, or what we call as portals. We need to ensure that those are placed and oriented correctly on the map. The reason is that as a remote person, this is my view of the space, right? So when I drive my avatar to portal 4 and I start looking, and I get a camera view from here, I need to know that I'm looking at this portion of the floor, right? So I need the system to place this portal at the correct location and correct orientation. So that's the problem we looked at. So this is the ground truth in an experiment we did. There are 6 or 7 portals, and the little stick, if you can see it, tells you which way it was pointed. Now, the approach we took, the basic approach is the idea is that in any of these setups, as I said, we have a screen, we also have a camera. So we have both the ability to project an image, in particular a fiducial marker on a screen, and have other cameras from other screens look at this. And then you can, you can imagine at a high level, you can figure out relative distance and relative orientation, right? Because so basically we're taking advantage of the fact that unlike a typical setting where you're trying to locate objects and so on, we are able to control what we put on the screen, so we can put something that's easy to detect and figure out orientation of it, right? So we do a bunch of peer-to-peer measurements between between the portals, and we also then say, okay, ultimately, if you want to sort of produce a map like this, you need to have some anchor points. You need to know at least the ground truth for one of these, because otherwise, just having done it is not enough. So the question is, can you figure out which one? And that involves human effort. So which one should the human provide input for, right? So that you have an optimal, you minimize error or maximize accuracy, and then obviously do this over the entire time. So the unknowns are the position and orientation of the display to the screen, and also the orientation of the camera, because although the camera might usually be pointing or perpendicular to the screen, sometimes could be a little tilted and rotated and so on. And we have 2 kinds of measurements. We have the measurement that tells you what is the heading of another display with respect to the camera heading. So what I mean is, my screen is like this, my camera is like that, and there is 30 degrees off. And then I also can estimate the orientation of the other display. So when I say orientation, like the heading is 30 degrees, but that one is oriented. So there are 2 kinds of measurements we're able to make, and we do this peer-to-peer. And in some cases, the camera here can see the screen, and the camera here can see that screen. So that's bidirectional measurements. But depending on the geometry, you may not be able to have bidirectional all the time. You might have unidirectional, right? So we have an algorithm that stitches all of these peer-to-peer measurements together, and also figures out what the optimal anchor node is. Again, anchor node is where you provide ground truth, and then everything else gets populated from that, right? So, and then this is the result. I'm not going to describe the algorithm, but I'm happy to share the paper. Is the result from this setup where we have a ground truth, which I think is the yellow dots, I think, and the green one is what we estimated. Right? Visually you can see that it's generally pretty good, and this is a measurement also of the error, right? And obviously the anchor is 0 error, and then as you go further away, the error both orientation wise and location wise increases, but it is still quite reasonable. And this is just showing this in action. So what's going to happen in this video is that we have a screen here, and then we have sort of more screen show up, and then we'll move us again, and we'll see This algorithm is figuring out the location orientation tunnel clear. So that's the first screen. That's the second one, and then this third one is the mobile one. So as this mobile one moves, you will see that our estimator sort of update its location orientation, in almost real time, right? So this is just showing this thing actually working. Let me move on. The other problem is of virtualizing physical users. So this is the space problems I talked about, right? I'll show you people. Now, the thing is that there are two things we are trying to do. One is we're trying to locate people so that we can put them in the right place in the map. But we're also trying to do representation, which is the face problems, right? We're trying to say, okay, this is what that person looked like, right? Now, in our system, we have these cameras that we talked about that go with every screen, and those are what I'm calling as the zoom view or the right? So this is like a drone and I have a camera. That can provide a high quality image of a person, but it has limited coverage. It can only do that for a relatively small portion of the space. We also augment that with one or maybe a couple of what I call as bird's eye view cameras, right? So think of a camera that's mounted in the ceiling that has a wide view of the floor, right? That camera provides wide coverage, but if you're like 20, 30 feet away from it, the face it picks out will be very blurry. In fact, yeah, so this is, we start with the face that the bird's eye view camera picks out of the person. It's not very good, and even if you try to use enhancement techniques, super resolution and so on, it doesn't get much better. Right? So the real challenge is how do we combine these two cameras? Right? People have done multi-camera tracking. The thing that I would say that's slight twist here is that we have multiple heterogeneous cameras. There's one camera that's got wide view with relatively poor quality images, and the other one with another set of cameras, each with a narrow view and high quality, right? And then how do you do sort of inter-camera matching with both spatial temporal signals and also image features. So that's really what we worked on. And yeah, let me just show you the thing actually working, right? So this is again a control experiment where this is the up close camera view, what are the non camera view, where these people are standing. This is obviously a little contract experiment, they're standing aligned. And this is what the distant camera sees. And as you see, these people start walking. We are able to combine the trajectory that's calculated using that camera view with the faces we saw here and keep that in sort of linkage. Right, so they are all here now, and this is what our map is showing. And yeah, okay, so they start walking. The trajectories are being calculated from that, and then we see the faces are much higher quality than what you would have obtained from that camera, right? So that's really what we done. Okay, so let me conclude this part of the talk and then maybe spend a few minutes about the lab also. I'm happy to take questions also. So just to conclude, HyWay is really about enabling mingling in these hybrid settings where you have remote and virtual users in these unstructured or semi-structured environments. I think what the lesson I would take from this work is really that by keeping things simple, we were able to deploy at scales of at least a few hundred users so far, right? That I think we would have not been able to do if you said, oh, we need this fancy hardware, or even sort of we need special hardware, let's say, right? Or we need people who are physically showing up to do something special. So that's one of the other things. We decided that people who are physically present should not have to do anything special, right? Because every one of those things is a barrier. And that simplicity has allowed us to do deployments, get feedback, improve, and so on. And I see many possible applications for this, some of which I talked about. There's a paper on the basic system that appeared last year, and there's another one in submission. I'm happy to share, and there are sort of many things we could do this. So, don't get any, if there are any questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, I will go on to.
Why don't you take questions at the end after your.
Okay, yeah. So let me very briefly talk about the lab. So you saw the map. You saw the map in the previous part of my talk. This is what the actual flow looks like, right? So let me Keshav will be there, so maybe he can say.
It's as fancy, it really is, that's the thing. And the phone is very good.
The food, okay. No, but my point was more like, okay, yeah, this does look nice, I agree, but my point is that the map that we showed in HyWay and this, and going back to the comment from the professor from Oregon, it felt like he'd been there. I think that was because that map kind of captured a lot of the look of this, I think. So the lab is part of Microsoft's global network of labs, which one of which is right here in town, Cambridge. We have labs in the US, actually, US West Coast, US East Coast, and China, and so on. And recently, we also have in Japan. Our lab is relatively small, I would say around 60, 65 full-time people, researchers, engineers, and program managers. But the actual number of people is more. I'll talk about that next slide. And the people we have actually are people who have very strong standing globally, right? They won awards. You see on my AAA, you have MacArthur Prize winner, the Grill Prize. These are major awards in those fields. So we're very happy with the kind of people we were able to attract. But what makes our lab special, the one in India, I would say, compared to the other MSR labs, is that we have a very strong research fellow program. Right? So these are people we hire typically after a bachelor's degree or a master's degree for up to 2 years. Right? So they come, they do research, and then many of them go on to higher studies in various places. But some of them decide to do startups, right? So Ola is the Uber equivalent in India, right? And so the student who did that is, he's a CEO. He's done extremely well. And as I often joke, he and I used to write papers together. I'm still writing papers, right? He has gone on to much bigger pursuits. One of these guys also became a Hollywood director. So we have people do lots of things, but many go for PhD and higher studies. And that brings a lot of energy, right? So that brings a bit of what the university has. In terms of areas of work, unsurprisingly, AI has been a strong growing area in the lab. Systems and networking, which is my background, is also a sizable area. We have theory and cryptography. And then the area that actually started, that the lab started, is really this technology and empowerment, right? And I think might even relate to some of the work that we talked about. And the projects and the work within each of these areas has evolved over time. And unsurprisingly, in the recent years, AI has been a sort of common theme in a lot of these things. I'm not really about a couple of projects, but again, maybe I'll just touch on a couple here. In the systems area, I think the opportunity we have sitting at Microsoft is that we have both infrastructure and we have first-party application services, right? So we can do co-design and cross-stack cross-layer optimization in a way that is interesting and something that perhaps not everyone can do. Like, just to give a very concrete example, I think the networking people here, others, which is in the old world, there was ISP networks, and then there were people who were using the network for their service, right? There was a separation between them. And an ISP network's job is to run the network, right? Now, in our case, we have a global WAN basically, right? Connecting all our data centers around the world. And we also have large first-party applications that account for a significant fraction of the traffic on the WAN. So we were able to take, for example, link failure information from the WAN, understand that data, and look at application level, let's call it deferability constraints. That, there is a load balancing workload that needs to shovel a bunch of data, but it doesn't have to happen right now. It can happen sometime in the next 2 days. And usually, when you have link failures and so on, you have to provision redundant capacity to make sure that you can satisfy your demand even when the link fails. But when you understand the workload, what you can say that, when the link fails, instead of having redundant capacity, I will simply pause the deferable workload and then resume it once the link failure has been repaired. Right? So that's a kind of unique opportunity we thought we have because of our position in Microsoft, so we were able to do that. I think you were asking about sort of work that happens in Redmond, and this is driven out of our lab. But in fact, we brought various global teams together and we made this happen. a bunch of work in this space. Let me just spend a couple of slides to talk about two projects. Maybe so extreme classification is something in machine learning. And the guy who did this, Manikarma, he's actually a PhD from, okay, your rival, Oxford. So he, Andrew Zisselman, I think he's the professor there, I think he worked, where he recognized that with classifiers, people were doing, dozens or hundreds of classes. He said, I want to do 1 billion classes. I want to treat every keyword or ad or whatever as a class, and then essentially build this technology called extreme classification. I'm not going to even attempt to explain what it does. There's lots of papers you can see. He has had his agenda going over 10 years. And in these 10 years, this has really become a subfield in the machine learning area. So you go to major conferences, they have workshops on this. And that originated with this colleague of mine in MSR India. And it has also had huge impact on Microsoft, in particular for ads and other things, right? So, in search and recommendation. So that's an example of work we've done that has been very impactful from a research viewpoint and from a Microsoft viewpoint. But we also do other work that is inspired by where we are, right? So road safety is a big problem in India. And if you've been in India, you might have experienced some of the chaos that happened in the roads. And so this is something that actually, when I moved back to India in 2007, was a project I started with Ram and others. We were too early. In 2007, the iPhone had barely been announced. So the smartphone, we thought we'd use smartphones to measure traffic and make drivers better. But we had an HP iPad back then, which didn't even have an accelerometer. So we had to, we were too early. But in 2016, in light of both smartphone advances and also AI, I decided to launch this new project called HAMS, stands for Harnessing Automobiles for Safety. The idea was the smartphone that I built that watching the driver and how they're driving and make things better, right? And fleets is what we were thinking. But what we actually managed to do was we automated the driver license test in a bunch of sites in India, right? And as of a couple of months ago, over 150,000 automated driver license tests in our system, right? So the idea is there's no inspector in the car. You go there, you attach the phone, you do your thing, you come back, you have an AI generated report, right? And the pass rate that used to be like 90% because of the system being the way it was, has now become much lower because people are being checked more rigorously. The other benefit which we didn't anticipate, we launched this in 2019, and since then it's gone to a bunch of sites. But when the pandemic happened and physical distancing became the norm, people loved this, right? Because now neither the inspector nor the driver had to sit with each other. It's just a smartphone doing this. So this won some awards on the ground, Chief Minister's Award at that stage. We also made the shortlist for the Prime Minister's Award for innovation, but in a minute, but there's an online ebook that talks about a bunch of projects including ours. So yeah, so that's really what I have. So I hope I give you a flavor for the lab and also the project. So thank you.
Okay, there's any questions? Go ahead.
So I guess I was interested in why you chose in two directions, so that for the remote participants, why the top-down map and not a sort of 3D system that you walk through, and then secondly, why the physical screens rather than like a robot that drives around. I mean, we see that in Unicom years ago, the sort of remote participants get this robot to drive around, which it seems to me more like immediately, oh, the camera's coming and it's got a person in it.
Yeah.
Kind of model. So why are those versus?
Yeah, great question, right? So the 3D thing, we do have a HyWay 3D variant that we tried as a little project. In our experience, and there's also something called Microsoft Mesh. I don't know if you've tried it. It's again a 3D immersive thing, and Teams has a mesh mode and so on, right? In our perhaps biased view, right? Those things are interesting, but they were not adding significant value, right? In the sense that sometimes people found it disorienting, like when we did this HyWay 3D thing, it was a little disorienting and so on. So we just decided to keep it simple, right? We said, okay, I'm not saying that's the right choice, but it is something that people seem to have been fine with, right? So that's that. Coming to your thing about the robot, I think it's an interesting point, right? I think ultimately the answer depends on density. So the screens we have, of course, are much less expensive, and you can put maybe depending on the size of your screen, you can put like maybe 9 life-size faces on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so of remote people. Whereas with these mobile robots, like the Beam or like the final companies do it's usually only one face, and it's a much more expensive way to make. So I think the question really is, what is the density, right? So if you have a setting where things are really spread out, you have a very large space and only a handful of users, then I think mobile robots is actually a better solution, because you don't need to put a screen in every nook and corner of that large space.
Yeah.
To only have like 3 remote users on, right? It's better to have those 3 remote robots and things like that. And of course, you've got the advantage that you said, which is the saliency is much better, right? You can't miss it, it's coming, right? Whereas if you have kind of things we've had, which is much more dense, then we've had events with 100, 200 remote participants. I don't think we would have had either the budget or the physical space to have 100, 200 robots, especially if you map so one robot per person. I think an interesting research question, if you've talked about, not really done anything about, is again a hybrid between these two, right? So if I'm in a mode where I'm just walking around, maybe I'm riding a robot. I come here, stop here, I start having a conversation with 4 people here. You can move me to the screen. You free up the robot for someone else who needs to walk around. Because I'm going to be there for the next 5 minutes talking to people. So I think we can do interesting sort of hybrid approaches as well.
Yeah, or you can put multiple people on one robot, right? So if there's a group of people, some of them are physical, some are virtual, walking down the hallway, you can cram 4 people on one robot.
Yeah, you could do that, except that then it's like soldiers march, right? Because now they have to, what people all have to want to go the same way, right? In lockstep. Because if I want to branch out there, then
Yeah, then you sort of have to leave for a static screen or wait for another robot to pick you up or something.
yeah. So that's the hybrid. Yeah. So that's good. So that's what I meant by hybrid. Like, can you sort of leverage the static screen that have their benefits, and the mobile robots in a more fluid way. Absolutely.
We need to wrap up. We have any other questions in the room? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I wanted to know that what's the prerequisite for developing the flow map? Like how many minimum images are you guys using right now?
Yeah, so we're not using images. So this is not image-based reconstruction. We're starting with the CAD drawing, DWG file, the most modern buildings have. And in the maps I showed, actually it was manual effort. The designer actually then took that and added texture and so on. But the research we are doing is using LLMs, multimodal LLMs, to pick out, these DWG files really have layers, right? And so pick out the right layers. Like there are some details you don't care about, so you kind of eliminate those, retain only the details you care about, and then add things like color and texture and look and feel to natural language prompts, right? So we are not using images. So you can do image-based reconstruction, Matterport camera and so on, do a 3D thing.
Even in LLMs you can, even with LLMs you can take the.
Yeah. But I think the approach we are taking is really leveraging the data that's already there, which is CAD files, right? And seeing how we can just augment the look and feel of those.
Okay, I think we do need to stop now, so let's thank everybody.